this is the Folksy Friend, and I am talking about Tolkien today. We are covering the period of 1,000 years after the creation of Valinor and the trees of the Valar, and before the awakening of the Elves. Over the course of the 1,000 years after the creation of the trees, Melkor stomped around Middle-earth using many terrible forms, wielding cold and fire. The Valar, on the other hand, spent the vast majority of their time in Valinor in peace, very rarely going back to Middle-earth at all. Aule spent his time crafting and smithing. Manwë did look out over Middle-earth from his home atop Taniquetil and did think about what they should do. And Ulmo continued to travel through the deep waters of the world, and it was because of his power that the things in Middle-earth did not die completely. The only two Valar who actually went into Middle-earth really at all were Yavanna and Arome. Arome would ride his horse Nahar through Middle-earth and would hunt the monsters and creatures of Melkor. At the sound of his mighty horn, evil things would flee, and Melkor himself would hide in Utumno. Of all the Valar, Arome was definitely the scariest. Tulkas may have been physically the strongest, but Arome was the most wrathful. The problem was, as soon as Arome left the area, darkness and evil things would just pour right back in. He could not fix the problem of Melkor on his own. Now, Yavanna loves everything that grows in Middle-earth, plants and animals, so she was deeply hurt by the damage that Melkor was doing. She would often go into Middle-earth and fix damaged things that she found and put a sleep over plants and animals to preserve them in hopes that one day they would be able to awaken and life could continue in Middle-earth. Remember, at this time, there is no light in Middle-earth, no source of illumination. The lamps are long destroyed, and now the two trees that light Valinor only light Valinor. Their light is blocked by the Pelori, so all of Middle-earth is in darkness. Yavanna was also the most vocal of any of the Valar about reminding the rest of them of their mission, their whole reason for being there in the first place. They had to prepare the world for elves and men, so she would urge them to go and take care of Melkor, to figure out how to get him out of the way before he could do any harm to elves and humans. Now, during the time that they were all awaiting the awakening of the elves, Aule became impatient. He wanted so badly to teach his skills and his knowledge to the children of Iluvatar that there came a point that he just couldn't wait anymore, and he decided to just make his own kids. Aule started his creation in secret because he was afraid of the judgment of the other Valar. He created a hall deep under a mountain in Middle-earth and began his work. When it came down to the actual crafting of the forms, he only had a rough idea of how to create the form of an elf or a human, and he wanted to create creatures that were strong enough to endure the evil and the rough state of the world. He wanted to create children that would be able to endure Melkor. So, Aule created the 7 fathers of the dwarves. Aule was happy with his creation. As soon as they were made, he immediately began teaching them to speak a language that he had created for them. But as soon as the dwarves were created, Iluvatar knew, and he spoke to Aule. "Why hast thou done this? Why dost thou attempt a thing which thou knowst is beyond thy power and thy authority? For thou hast from me as a gift thy own being only, and no more. And therefore, the creatures of thy hand and mind can live only by that being, moving only when thou thinkest to move them, and if thy thought be elsewhere, standing idle. Is that thy desire?" Basically, Iluvatar is not happy. He reminds Aule that he doesn't have the ability to create life. What he's made is basically a bunch of puppets that are only going to move if Aule wants them to move. And if he's thinking about something else, they're just going to stand there. Aule responds that this is not what he wanted, to create dolls that had no minds of their own. He just wanted creatures to love and to teach and to share with them the beauty of the world. He admits that he was impatient and he made a mistake. Aule says that he does not want Iluvatar to be angry, and that, as a child to his father, I offer to thee these things, the work of the hands which thou hast made. And he offers to kill the dwarves. Aule picks up his mighty hammer and rises it up to smush the dwarves, and he is weeping. His honesty and humility moved Iluvatar. So in that instant, he gave the dwarves consciousness. The dwarves shrank away from Aule, seeing that he was about to destroy them, and they begged for mercy. I'm not sure why Iluvatar did not tell Aule immediately to put the hammer down, so the dwarves did not have to be so traumatized. But as Aule is about to swing the hammer, Iluvatar tells him to stop and to look at the dwarves. He said that he had given them their own minds, and Aule could tell because the dwarves were afraid and pleading for themselves. Iluvatar would let the dwarves live, and Aule rejoiced. He thanked Iluvatar and asked Iluvatar to fix the dwarves. I'm guessing to make them look more like elves or humans, maybe. But Iluvatar says, nope, they will exist exactly as you have created them, but they will not come into the world before the elves. Well, just take a look at his exact words. They shall sleep now in the darkness under stone, and shall not come forth until the firstborn have awakened upon the earth. And until that time, thou and they shall wait, long though it seem, and they shall be to thee as children, and often strife shall arise between thine and mine, the children of my adoption and the children of my choice. Yeah, that's what he said. Let's leave it at that. Aule takes these sleeping dwarf fathers and places them within different mountains of Middle-earth. Then he went back to Valinor to wait. In time, he finally tells his wife, Yavanna, about what he has done. She acknowledged that he was happy and that Iluvatar had given him a gift, but because he had hidden this from her, and she was in no way involved in their creation, his creation would have little love for the things of her love, things that grow. She says, and I imagine with a little bit of spite, they will love first the things made by their own hands, as doth their father. They will delve the earth, and the things that grow and live upon earth they will not heed. Many a tree shall feel the bite of their iron without pity. Yeah, she was not happy. And not helping the situation, Aule tells her that, yes, that is true, but the same could be said of the elves and humans. They would have control and dominion over the world, and they would use its resources without respect or gratitude. I'm not sure if he was just trying to divert her anger away from him or trying to point out the truth. But Yavanna tells him that that would only be true if Melkor darkens the hearts of elves and men. Nevertheless, she was upset by what he said. So she goes to Manwë and kind of brings up what Aule was talking about without mentioning the creation of the dwarves. He confirmed that the children of Iluvatar would use the earth as they wanted and asked her why they were talking about this. She told him that she was worried. First, Melkor had destroyed many of her creations in Middle-earth, and now everything that was left was just going to be used and abused. Manwë asked her what she wanted to do about that. If she could protect maybe one thing, what would it be? But she couldn't choose just one thing. Everything she created was very important to her. Everything from the mightiest tree down to the tiniest mouse. But she did acknowledge that it was the plants that were really more at risk. Animals could at least run away, but things with roots could not. So she says that if she did have one wish, it would be that the trees would be able to defend anything with roots. Manwë thought this was a bit of a weird request, but he did go to ask Dad about it. Manwë went into a little bit of a trance, and in time he was able to kind of feel what Iluvatar was thinking about Yavanna's request. To put it simply, Manwë relayed that Iluvatar just wanted to remind Yavanna that he knew everything. He knew what she was thinking. He knew the future. He knew the way the plants would be treated. He knew. He's the big creator. He knows. He told her that when the elves awaken, so will a great multitude of spirits, and those spirits will go among the plants and the animals, and some of them would go to live within the trees. So when the elves awaken, so will some of the trees. If you hadn't guessed, talking about the Ents. And these creatures would be able to protect the forests. Then Manwe reminded Yavanna himself that when they had been Ainur out in the void singing about the world, they had been in harmony. He had understood her thoughts and she had understood his thoughts. And he told her about the coming of the great eagles, that they would come to serve the Valar and to protect the natural world. Basically, between Manwe and Iluvatar, they reminded Yavanna that all bases were covered. Of course, Yavanna was super happy. She immediately says, "Oh good, then I'm gonna grow some really tall trees that the eagles can live in." But Manwe immediately shoots her down. He says that only the trees of Aule will be tall enough for the eagles. They would live up in the mountains, but the shepherds would walk among the trees. So Yavanna rushes home to tell Aule about what she has learned. He's out in his smithy working on some stuff, and the following conversation takes place. "Now let thy children beware, for there shall walk a power in the forests, whose wrath they will arouse at their peril. Nonetheless, they will have need of wood," said Aule, and he went on with his smith work. I don't know if that exchange was written to be funny, but it's just hilarious to me. The idea that Yavanna essentially bursts in the door and goes, "Ha, my kids will be able to defend themselves. You were wrong." And without even looking up from whatever he's tinkering with, he's like, "Yeah, but they're still going to get cut down." Like, I wonder about their marriage. So, after the creation and the sleep of the dwarves, the years continued to pass. Valinor remained a place of bliss, and only really Orome and Yavanna went into Middle-earth. Melkor continued to grow stronger and stronger. He never slept. From Autumno, his evil and his darkness continued to spread south. The evil things that he had perverted walked abroad, and the dark, slumbering woods were haunted by monsters and shapes of dread. Within his fortress, the spirits that had been with him from the very beginning were slowly starting to change to be more like him. They became cloaked in darkness with hearts of fire. They had whips of flame, and terror went before them. Later, they would be given the more commonly known name, Balrogs. But as terrifying and mighty as the Balrogs were, they weren't the only creatures in Melkor's army. Melkor also bred many monsters of diverse shapes and kinds that long troubled the world. And as if all that wasn't enough, he also built a new fortress and armory that he placed in the northwest in preparation for the Valar coming back to battle him. This fortress was named Angband, and he gave control of it to his first lieutenant, Sauron. So in the west, we have the Valar, who are living their best lives and mostly ignoring the fact that in the middle of the world, their one and only enemy was amassing power and taking control of the entire continent where they knew somewhere elves and humans were sleeping. I can't help but wonder if they had bothered to attack him much sooner, right after their power had been regained, if they could have just nipped the problem in the bud. But as I'm sure I'm going to mention many times in the future, the Valar have a bit of a problem with inaction. After many, many years passed after the creation of the trees, Yavanna and Orome finally convinced the others to sit down and talk about the Melkor issue. The children of Iluvatar were going to awake soon. They didn't know exactly when or where, but they knew it was coming relatively soon. Yavanna was the first to speak, and she really called them on their nonsense. "Shall we then leave the lands of their dwelling desolate and full of evil? Shall they walk in darkness while we have light? Shall they call Melkor Lord while Manwe sits upon Taniquetil? I like her. She gets to the point. Tulkas immediately wanted to go on the offense. But Manwe told Mondos to speak to the group. Mondos told the group that the children were going to awake, but not quite yet. He also said that it was predestined that the firstborn, or the elves, would awake in darkness, and the first thing they would see would be the brightness of the stars. And because of this, in the future, the elves would call out for Varda when they needed help. Upon hearing this, Varda leaves the council and goes back up to her home on top of Taniquetil, and she looks out upon the existing stars. Now, from what I can understand based on the Silmarillion, the first book of Lost Tales, and the Lord of the Rings, we are not entirely sure who created the original stars. We know that Arda was created in the deeps of time and amidst the innumerable stars, but that doesn't say for sure if Varda herself created these innumerable stars, or if they existed before Arda was created, in which case Iluvatar would have made them. I'm not even 100% sure if they existed within Arda itself, so within like the sphere of the world, or if they existed out in the void and you could just kind of like barely see them from within the world. It's possible that Varda created them in the world and just set them really far away from the land, so they were only dim. We do know that in Fellowship, when Frodo and Sam hear the singing of the elves are singing a song about Varda, and they say that she sowed the stars in the sunless year. But I think that is going to refer to what she's about to do, and not what she did in the past. Whatever the case may be, there were existing stars. They were very far away and very dimly lit. Varda knew that the existing stars were not bright enough to light the earth for the elves, so she began a labor greater than anything any of the Valar had done since they came into Middle-earth. She took the dew from the pools beneath the silver tree Telperion and created new stars. She created them to be bright and set them close enough to light the world, and she gathered some of them into constellations. Tolkien gives us the name of 6 of the constellations that she created, but the most important is that of the Velastirka, the sickle of the Valar. It was a crown of 7 mighty stars that she placed in the far north of the world as a very clear warning to Melkor. This labor took her a long, long time, and just as she finished, the elves awoke under the starlight. Thank you for spending some time with me here today as I talked about Tolkien. I hope you'll join me next Tuesday when I go over what the elves are going to face now that they're awake. Will the Valar help them? Will they even realize that the elves are there? We'll talk about it next week. If you enjoyed this video, please leave me a like, and I'll see you next week.